Hello, and welcome to Graywood Gardening. It seems like a switch was flipped at the end of August, and our hot, humid Minnesota summer weather was immediately replaced with cool fall-like weather. In fact, the obedient plant here in the cottage garden has begun blooming. I'm a huge fan of this flower, not just because it's incredibly beautiful, at least when planted in clumps with these tall spikes of purple tubular blossoms that the bees and the hummingbirds love, but also because it is so difficult to find a shade plant that blooms in the fall rather than the spring. So this is fantastic. On this video, we're actually going to spend a bunch of time in the veggie garden where we've got a little bit of a powdery mildew problem, and I think a bunch of the pumpkins are at the end of their life. In addition, I'm going to work on putting in some in-ground beds where hopefully next year we can grow some perennial crops. But first, I have to finish planting the final plants for the fall veggie garden, which is all of the salad greens. So let's get started. All right, I'm getting ready to plant the very last of my fall garden, which is mostly salad greens. So now that we're entering into cool weather again, which is so nice, we have the perfect conditions for growing things like lettuce. And what's interesting is the lettuce will keep growing through sometime in October. And sometime in October, it will become not so much the temperature, but there will be little enough light. There'll be too little light for the plants to really grow, and then they'll just stop growing and they'll stay right where they are. And they'll hold that way until we get a night that's too cold that actually kills them. But lettuce will do just fine down to somewhere in the 20-degree range. So they can get pretty cold at night without dying off. And things like spinach and arugula can get even colder. The first thing I'm planting here is Salanova lettuce. Salanova lettuce comes from Johnny's Seeds. It was developed for use by market farmers, and it's kind of a perfect lettuce. Okay, that is all of the Salanova lettuce in the ground now. What I have next is a bunch of mini romaines. And actually, this is one of those mini romaines. So this is exactly what it looks like. This is two heads growing side by side, way too close together. But I love the mini romaines because they're small enough that they can still work in a salad mix without having to cut them up. Maybe you want to cut the leaf in half. But they also have a lot more crunch than your standard leaf lettuce. So I think that they really elevate a salad. Okay, that's all the mini romaine. So I've got two butterhead lettuces here. And this is fantastic lettuce to use on burgers or sandwiches. And then I also have some Swiss chard, and this is the first time I've actually experimented with starting my Swiss chard inside. Normally, I plant it straight outside. I didn't want to do that because it was so disgustingly hot and humid for most of August this year. All right, well that stuff fit in here pretty well. And this is super exciting to see. This is a ton of salad greens. Now if I wanted to, I could start harvesting it young in 2 to 3 weeks, but realistically, I'm gonna wait until the end of September. It's the very beginning of September now. The very end of September, when these are gonna be pretty large, I'll start harvesting them. This should give us salad greens throughout all of October, even as it starts to get pretty cold. So to me, this is a very exciting fall bed. I do have a little bit of kohlrabi left over, so I'm gonna find a hole in another garden to shove that into. But otherwise, I think the fall garden is done. Now, it's probably time to start taking stuff out. Well, powdery mildew has struck a cucurbit alley here. We did get one successful pie pumpkin out of this plant, but I think all of the... Hello!
A ball.
Yeah, it does look like a ball. That's a pumpkin.
A ball.
Yeah, so little Graywood and I...
Ball.
Is that a ball? Well, why don't I get that for you, okay?
Yeah.
So little Graywood and I are going to go ahead, harvest the couple pie pumpkins that we have. Look at that.
The ball.
Yeah, it's a pumpkin. Yeah, that's a pumpkin. But do you want me to hold one of your things so you can hold the pumpkin? Yeah. Yeah, good job. We're gonna bag up everything that has powdery mildew because we don't want the powdery mildew as much as possible getting in the soil, and we don't want to toss it in the compost and have powdery mildew compost. Is there another ball over there? Is that yours? Okay, well I will get that ball for you, okay? Oh, this one I think is gonna be decorative. I don't think we're gonna get anything out of that. The cantaloupe here clearly did not make it. I doubt there's anything edible inside of this. And I think, again, we just got everything out way too late. Oh, hi. Oh, have you got your pumpkin?
That's it.
Yeah. Do you want, this is a cantaloupe. It also looks like a ball. Do you want one of those?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that a ball? Yeah. Is there more over there? There's more that way. The watermelons actually don't look like they have any damage at all. They're not dying off, they don't have the powdery mildew, but all the squashes do. So all the pumpkins do, and the butternut squash are looking pretty grim. For a while it looked like we were gonna get butternut squash, now I think we won't. And obviously all of the cantaloupe look pretty bad, and I think we're better off getting rid of them sooner rather than later. Yeah, that's a pumpkin.
Apple.
It's not a ball, it's a pumpkin.
Ball.
Pumpkin.
Ball.
We have a much more difficult situation here because this guy is actually growing a pumpkin. So I think what I'm going to do is cut off the really bad powdery mildew leaves to try to slow the spread. But these really, really bad leaves have got to go. So we also have some powdery mildew happening here in the zucchini and the yellow squash. Now these plants have variegated leaves that can look from a distance like powdery mildew, but these white spots are just part of the leaf pattern. But we also have some leaves that clearly have powdery mildew on them. So I'm going to want to get all of those clipped off and put away. Again, we're past the really hot and humid weather, so I'm not too worried about the powdery mildew spreading super quickly through everything. But I do want to get the worst ones off, and I am told that for zucchini and yellow squash, it's generally a good care anyway to be clipping off some of these bottom leaves and opening it up. Now the last thing to do is to wash, preferably with some hydrogen peroxide, these shears, because I also don't want to be spreading those powdery mildew spores to the next thing I clip. And there are a lot of flowers that are susceptible to powdery mildew, and I don't want to be passing the powdery mildew to them when I'm deadheading. I'm working a little bit on the infrastructure for the veggie garden, putting stuff in place for next year. So in addition to all the raised beds, the plan is also to have in-ground beds pretty much all along the fence line. We want to border these in-ground beds just with these single 4x4 posts. So the plan is to set the 4x4 posts in, drill a 1/2-inch hole in them, and then pound a 2-foot rebar through that hole, and that way we'll keep the borders of the beds pretty firmly in place. This back bed is only going to be 2 feet deep. All I really want is enough space to grow vining crops that can vine up along this back fence. And since that way is south, sun's going this way, and there's nothing back there to shade out. So this will be for cucumbers, gourds, peas, beans, even indeterminate tomatoes. Right, this bed here, all along this fence, the plan is to grow raspberries and hopefully even some blackberries, although they're not really zone 4, along this fence. Now, this bed is V-shaped. It's much wider here than it is in the back, and that's because the fence isn't a right angle here. So we chose to make the raised beds in a straight line at a right angle, have this bed a V. So this means that when we eventually do get raspberries and blackberries here, there's gonna be a whole bunch of space up front. Maybe we'll plant some flowers here to help attract the pollinators into the garden, or maybe I'll put some other kind of perennial crop here like French sorrel or rhubarb or even strawberries. It has abruptly gotten very chilly here in Minnesota. In fact, the low tonight is supposed to be just 40 degrees, and tomorrow night it's supposed to be 38 degrees. And basil hates cold weather. In fact, the basil leaves can get damaged if the temperature gets down to just the 40s. We even have a few basil plants that are suffering because we have had a few nights in the upper 40s already. So I need to get all of these basil plants pulled up and use them to make pesto. Unfortunately, I don't have time today or maybe even tomorrow to make the pesto. So what I'm going to do is actually pull all the plants up, root and all, shake the dirt off, and toss them all into a bucket with a little bit of water in it. And that should let the plants keep for a couple of days until we have time to strip all the leaves off and make batch after batch after batch of pesto. All right, let's get started. Oh, there we go. All right, well, I ended up with 2 huge buckets overflowing with basil and 1 smaller bucket with a lot of damaged basil that's just, there's not even much you can pick through and save on this. But I'm really happy with saving these guys, and it smells just amazing. I think I'm actually going to be tossing these buckets inside in my office to store until we're ready to make the pesto. It is a reminder, though, that fall is just around the corner, and it's only going to be a few more weeks before we're pulling out most of the crops in the garden, except for the exceptionally frost-tolerant ones. So enjoy the harvest while you can. We had an unexpected frost advisory last night after it rained all day long, so I was out there in the dark with the flashlight trying to cover up plants in the veggie garden. Now, I'm going to take a look this morning, see how everything did. We don't know for sure whether it was going to get below 32 or not, but the Weather Channel seemed to think so. Eventually, I plan to have a bunch of proper row covers and some hoops to hold them up off the plants, but in the meantime, Mrs. Graywood has authorized the use of a bunch of her sheets to try to cover up some of these crops. However, I didn't have enough sheets to cover everything, so these jalapenos were left uncovered, and they look to be just fine. And peppers are one of those plants that it gets below freezing, and they're dead. So this means it definitely did not get below 32 degrees last night, which means everything in the veggie garden should be just fine. It's good news. The beans are beginning to bloom, so if we can go maybe another 2 or even 3 weeks before we do get a real freeze, we might yet get a bean crop in this year. All right, well that's all I have for you on this video. One thing we definitely did not get to was digging out this garden area in front of our new porch. One of the main reasons for that is we finally got our hands on a playset kit for the back, and we have been spending a ridiculous amount of time trying to get that assembled, and it's very slow going. Well, according to the forecast, we should actually have another week or 2 of warm weather before it gets cold again, which is good, but we are already starting to see the rudbeckia starting to fade, and even the obedient plant pretty soon is going to get replaced by the chrysanthemums and the New England aster, and of course we have a lot of sunflowers and annuals still pushing forward all the way up into the hard frost, and hopefully we'll see the veggie garden starting to produce a bumper crop of fall veggies. All right, in the meantime, happy gardening.